Hi guys, this is going to be just the last portion of our lecture that was remaining from last Thursday, and we're going to be talking about rangelands of the world. So this figure is out of your book, and it designates the different types of rangeland that we see throughout the entire world. So we've got quite a bit of woodland savanna areas, quite a bit of grasslands, and then a lot of barren land as well. So barren land again is not going to be classified as rangeland. It's really hard to get stuff to grow there. So a couple of the categories that we're going to talk about today are really the different types of rangeland that occur throughout the world. And the first one is tundra. So a lot of people think that tundra areas actually have no vegetation, but there's got to be some vegetation there because there's some wildlife species that actually live in those areas. So a tundra is classified as a treeless plain that has low temperatures, very poor nutrients, minimal precipitation, and very short growing seasons, like 60 days or less. There's two main types of tundra, Arctic and Alpine. The Arctic tundra is located in the northern part of the hemisphere, encircles the North Pole and the South Pole regions, and tends to have permafrost soils, so not very productive. Alpine tundras are going to be very high in the mountains, so the altitude is really high, so it's really hard to get trees to actually grow at that point. So that the alpine tundra is what we're going to deal with a little bit more in depth in terms of rangeland, because grazing actually does take place here, and we have a little bit of tundra in the U.S. In the Idaho area. So the fauna that you're going to see on tundra are going to be very large herbivores like musk oxen and some caribou and reindeer, and these animals have been very well adapted to these major or these very harsh climates. Second type of rangeland that we see throughout the world in pretty expansive numbers is grasslands. And grasslands, again, is classified as where vegetation is dominated primarily by grasses and non-woody or non-shrub plants. So these grasslands occur on all continents except Antarctica. And there's two main types of grasslands, temperate versus tropical. Grasslands can be further subdivided as or subcategorized as steppes. So, a couple of the steppes that we're going to talk about as we proceed through the class is the cold steppe and the subtropical steppe. A steppe is defined as a grassland that doesn't have any trees associated with it. So, in the cold steppe areas, we're going to see those areas like in Patagonia, as well as the South Island of New Zealand. So still quite a bit of grazing takes place, but the types of grass that grows there has to be very hardy to last in those colder temperatures. The subtropical steppes are going to occur in areas like the Pampas area in South America, some of the European areas, specifically Sicily, Spain, and Greece, where we see higher humidity temperatures, and then the Australian areas that surround the desert. The third type of rangeland that we see pretty frequently throughout the world are these shrublands. And shrublands are going to be areas that are dominated by shrubs. So, again, shrubs are woody species that are not trees, so woody plant species. And the shrubs can be very mature in vegetation type, or these shrublands can actually be categorized on a roaming basis to where you have large amounts of shrub vegetation for a few years, and then eventually you'll have other species move in and take over that area. So we see shrublands in areas where disturbance has taken place, so fire, logging, or overgrazing. You'll see lots of shrublands being developed within a forested community. So, and those shrublands are very affected for a couple of different reasons. They're going to allow different types of vegetation to actually grow and thrive. That's going to bring in different types of wildlife as well as our domestic grazers as well. The two main types of shrublands that we're going to talk about is Xeric versus Mesic. Xeric shrublands are adapted to a super dry climate. They don't hold moisture very well. They have high rates of transpiration, and they receive very little rainfall. So some of the shrublands that we see here in the U.S. are going to be like the desert Southwest areas. The Mesic shrublands have more precipitation in those areas, so they're going to have more lush forage, more green forage is going to occur on a cyclical basis. The desert shrublands that are typically of the xeric designation have those plants are going to have very, very small leaves so that they lose less water because of evapotranspiration. And on the Mesic side of that, like we see in the Mediterranean, those climates are going to mostly be near the sea. So they're classified as deserts because the soil types tend to not be great. They tend to be more sandy in nature. And so even though they're receiving quite a bit of rainfall, they don't get a lot of forage production because the soil isn't as productive as it should be. So some of the shrubland regions that we're most familiar with as far as rangelands throughout the world is the Matorral region in southern Chile and southern Spain, and then the Macha in Italy, and the Caguaguan in southwest Australia as well. A fourth rangeland type that we see in high population throughout the world is the savanna. And the savanna is going to be a very tropical area, tropical grassland that has an open canopy of trees. So these savannas are characterized by really high temperatures, tend to be pretty dry, and are usually a transition zone between our forested areas as well as a desert area. So they're that inner region. There's a wide belt of savanna regions along the equatorial border between the tropical rainforests and that next biome, the desert regions. So the savannas are going to be very common in two respects. First of all, they're going to have a varying amount of rainfall that is going to result in times of the year that are very wet and times that are very dry. And those dry seasons are going to lead to wildfires. So savanna wildfires are actually very common. So again, these temperate savannas that we see in the mid-latitudinal regions are going to have wetter summers and drier winters. And then the montane savannas are going to be savannas that we see at higher altitudes. And those are going to have their own characteristics of different grass species that grow in those areas. So the desert regions we can see in this figure here, where we have desert further subcategorized into arid or hyper-arid, arid, semi-arid, subhumid, or subterranean and a humid area. So you can see we've got a big chunk of northern Africa that is hyper-arid, which means that it is desert. It's the Saharan desert specifically. So things don't grow very well there. Our desert regions can occur as desert grasslands or shrublands or barren land. So deserts have a lot of variation in their classification. They're going to be either semi-arid or arid, mostly relating to the amount of precipitation that they get. Our cool deserted areas are going to be pretty temperate, and those are the ones that we really see truly categorized as rangeland. So our arid deserts are defined as having a severe lack of available water, therefore there's a lack of vegetation, whereas semi-arid, which is what we have here in the U.S., is classified as just having a lack of precipitation. So some examples that we see of deserts is the Gobi Desert in Siberia and the Near Arctic realm in the northern hemisphere up near Greenland. All right, so that concludes our really brief overview of rangelands of the world. And remember that this will be on the quiz that will be posted that you guys need to have done before this next Thursday. So we will see you in class.